Picture yourself in the vast, untamed wilderness of Saskatchewan, and the only sound that breaks the silence is that of the howl of wolves. This is the wilderness that drew Kenton Carnegie, and what began as a peaceful walk in nature would turn into a horrific scene, almost like it was out of a movie. As Kenton ventured further from the camp, he could hear the sound of wolf howls becoming closer and closer. As the tension mounted and the shadows began to shift through the trees, all he would have been able to hear is the scuffle of snow and footsteps and low and faint growls. What would go down next is a prime example of what can go wrong at the intersection of humans and wild predators. In this episode, we're going to take you to the heart and terrifying nature of the events that led to Kenton's tragic end, and we're going to take a deep dive into the dynamics of human and wolf interactions, wolf biology, and what drives these extremely intelligent predators to suddenly see humans as prey. This episode isn't just going to examine the bad side of human-wolf interactions in nature. It's also going to give you some wildlife survival tips for interactions with bears, interactions with wolves, things that you can actually put to use the next time you're out hiking. And we're also going to look at a few other key cases of wolf attacks because they're super rare. So stick around for this terrifying and heart-pounding episode. Before we get too far into this, I'm definitely going to give you a little bit of background because it's super important in the context of this episode and when we talk about animal attacks to understand what makes this animal tick because it doesn't think like you and me. So in particular, most of the time we're going to be talking about something called the gray wolf or Canis lupus, and this is the largest member of the dog family. Their size does vary differently, but an adult mature male wolf can be like 6.5 feet long and weigh about 110 pounds. I know that there's been wolves getting to that 180 to 100 pound range. This species is widely distributed across North America and pretty much anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's not just a Canadian or American species. So as you may know already, wolves are super highly sociable animals. They thrive in kind of a pack. And this helps support not only hunting, it also helps ward off predator attacks and things like that. Their social structure is super crucial in their survival. And one of the things that's notable is that typically a alpha male directs the pack and he's the boss of the social structure, so to speak, until he is challenged and removed from that post and another male steps up. Interestingly enough too though, the alpha male typically, that hierarchy also extends to the females. Basically a kind of alpha female that keeps the other female wolves in line, so to speak. Despite their fearsome reputation, wolf and human interactions not only are rare, they rarely attack humans. Wolves generally avoid human contact and they don't typically see us as a prey species. Documented wolf attacks are exceedingly rare. I think there's something like maybe 26 recorded events that have happened in kind of modern times. So it's a matter of just not having a lot of data to really examine how and why wolf attacks happen. It's a very rare event. The most common time I've seen them is actually out moose hunting, and they can be very curious. It's quite interesting. They'll come right up to you if you're quiet, but generally, yeah, you can hear them walking around you if you really listen sometimes, but they sneak by so quickly and move around so quietly that it's almost impossible to actually see one if you're not really paying attention. And also, the vocalizations, like that is way more common. You hear wolves 100 times to the time you actually probably see one. So you can hear them almost every night at my camp where we go up, and it's beautiful to hear. It's super eerie, especially if you're out hunting alone, but I don't think it's never crossed my mind that, hey, I might get attacked by one of these things. So it's interesting dynamic. Bears, on the other hand, yeah, like that crosses my mind a lot more often. And that's just statistically, it's more backed up. There's a lot more human bear interactions and attacks. But wolves really are a natural apex predator. One of the coolest things is not just the way they operate as a pack, but it's the special and anatomical features that wolves actually have, their canine teeth. It acts like a pair of scissors forming something called a carnassial shear. And when the teeth bite down, it can actually like bite right through thick bone, right through a moose leg kind of thing. Another thing that the wolf has is like the development of the enlarged sagittal crest on the top of her skull. And this allows for basically to anchor larger, stronger temporal muscles and masseter muscles so that this thing basically has jaws that can break through flesh and bone. Typically, wolves will have young once a year, and it's a lot of effort goes into raising their young. And you'll see their wolf pups are stupid just like our dog pups. They're super curious. If you're going to see a wolf, it's probably going to be a pup that wants to run up to you and actually see you. Wolf species. So there's actually a lot of controversy over this, believe it or not. So in Ontario, for example, they've identified like a secondary wolf species called the red wolf and have laid out hunting restrictions and all these kind of protections around this wolf species. In addition, there's like an eastern wolf that's been put into the books, but a lot of biologists argue that these wolves aren't actually a different species, but it's just a result of crossbreeding with coyotes or domestic dogs. It seems wolves and humans have somewhat evolved together. The history of wolves and humans definitely goes back throughout, right back to ancient history almost. So wolves and humans formed a symbiotic relationship that was believed to go back as early as the hunter-gatherer times. And what's super interesting is that because we've been together so long, we've actually developed biological responses to being around each other. And they've shown that oxytocin, which is also referred to as like a drug that causes love, it's also a drug that helps you form like tribal bonds, pair bonds, like all these things biologically. And when dogs and humans interact, they've actually shown that their closeness can bring the production of oxytocin in each other, and it actually forms a bond. And they believe that's just a result, literally thousands of years of their evolution together. So it's been shown time and time again that these things communicate on like a high level compared to other mammalian species. And it allows them to work together as a pack of like multiple wolves to take down an animal, say a moose, which could be over 1,000 pounds. They can run distances like 30 kilometers in a single chase just to run down a moose to the point of exhaustion. And they actually develop specialized muscles in their body for these endurance runs. And it allows wolves, in coordination with this pack, like exhaust caribou, moose, other animals long before they become exhausted. These things can identify a moose that's wounded and somehow take them down by essentially controlling this animal by herding it to where they want it to go. And then in unison, communicating with each other about when one will attack, when one will back off, when one will bait the moose. So they'll do these fake attacks where they run in so that the moose is going to go into a defensive posture, allowing another wolf to come in and attack it and maybe knock it down. And these things aren't stupid. They want to avoid those super sharp claws from the moose, because for a wolf, the one thing that's certain is like any injury means death. These things need to be able to hunt and need to be able to participate in the pack, or they're as good as dead. So final takeaway, these things are designed to be quiet, sneaky, lethal killing machines that can run further than you can imagine. And essentially, you're going to need a miracle if they decide one day that you're going to be the prey. The only thing I can think of is maybe you could just tell them that they're like a good boy and they'll chill down. But anyway, let's get into a few stories of exactly how this crazy killing machine, land killing machine, the wolf, has actually interacted with humans, and the result wasn't so good. Okay, so back to Kenton Carnegie. So it was in the remote parts of northern Saskatchewan, which is part of like Canada's boreal forest. And Kenton's staying at a place called Points North Landing. And it's a rugged outpost surrounded by a lot of black spruce forest and kind of boggy areas. Kenton Carnegie was a 22-year-old geology student from Ontario who had a huge love for the outdoors. And in November of 2005, he decides to take an opportunity to get some practical exploration experience, mining exploration. And this is part of his studies, and he decides to head up to northern Saskatchewan, unaware that this choice would end his life. So Kenton's no stranger to the wilderness. During his time in school and during his personal life, he had spent a lot of time exploring Canada's backcountry and getting to know both the landscape and nature itself. His time at Points North was simply meant to be another chapter in a what was supposed to be like a long and fruitful life. So in these areas, it is, when I say remote, it's hard for a lot of people to understand. I've been to a lot of these kind of remote mineral exploration camps, and they're often can be isolated hundreds of miles from the closest human civilization. And that human civilization might literally be like a town of 80 people. Often you have to fly in by helicopter, airplane. So you're on your own, or you're relying on the camp and the people that are there in any emergencies. So it's a very interesting and neat experience. You can experience silence on a night in January when it's minus 40 that I can't explain. Your ears ring in the silence. You feel like you're literally at the end of the universe. It's gorgeous. The northern lights, the stars. Can't recommend it enough. Get off your couch and fucking head north. Anyhow, Kenton. It's no stranger to the wilderness, like I said, and during his time, he liked to explore the area, get out of the camp when he wasn't working, and in the days leading up to the event itself, he had actually had several close encounters with wolves. So one thing I want to point out is that a lot of times in these camps, people will feed wolves and bears and think it's funny or think there's a novelty to it to be able to see a wild animal come in and chill like a wolf or a fox, but it doesn't end well. Never a good idea. And usually camps like this have a lot of things in place to make sure that human wildlife interactions don't happen. Things like electric fencing, the way they even store their garbage a lot of times is actually burnt just to avoid animals coming into camp. And it seemed to me that these wolves are actually hanging around that mining camp, so they probably were getting food. And in particular, it was said that kind of the pack that was hanging around the camp was starting to become quite bold, basically meaning they're losing their fear of humans. So it was actually the morning of November 8, 2005 that Kenton decides to go out for a walk, as he often did. And when I say like those wolves are being bold and hanging around camp, I'm going to say people probably weren't really scared of them because, again, they behave just like pet dogs, even though that's not how they're thinking. So Kenton often took walks outside of the camp, and in that area surrounding like that northern boreal forest, you're going to see a lot of wildlife. So it is pretty nice to go out and see the water. You might see some ruffed grouse, things like that. And at that time of year, like in November, it's definitely cold. So the leaves have basically fallen off the tree. You're starting to get snow and frost. And on this particular day, there's a light frosting and dusting of snow on the ground. So it's making everything like this bleach white, pristine white everywhere. And as Kenton is taking his walk, he can hear probably crunches in the leaves and twigs starting to break, not understanding what's going on. As he walked further and further from the camp, he would be probably unaware that the little noises and things that he's hearing was actually a pack of wolves following him slowly and surreptitiously to take him as prey. The wolves' movements become synchronized, and they start to move as a pack, closing in on Kenton. He would have noticed the unease growing in the forest, perhaps the silence of the birds and the crunching of the snow. Perhaps he would hear a low, imperceptible growl as the alpha male signaled to the others in the pack it was time to attack. But it would have been too late. The attack itself would have been brutal but short. The scene itself would have been utterly gruesome, with the white snow and the contrast of bright blood spewing across the landscape. His attempts to defend himself would have been completely fruitless as he was outnumbered by the pack, and this tragic situation unfolds faster than Kenton probably had time to process it. Wolves typically aim for vulnerable spots on the body, trying to essentially render their prey unconscious as fast as possible. Prior to the attack, typically the wolves are going to organize themselves in a position where they can ensure the prey has no escape. Wolves will often try to nip at or bite tendons quickly, tendons to completely immobilize their targets, making them helpless. When Kenton fails to return back to the camp, he's reported missing, and it's not until the next day that he's actually found. The scene itself is described as gruesome, and wildlife experts and the police are called. In the aftermath of his death, wildlife experts do go over the forensics of the scene and try to understand why this attack, one, occurred, and two, to see if there's any other relevant information in relation to maybe the wolves are suffering from disease, maybe they're likely to predate again and need to be trapped, captured, and possibly put down, all kinds of things. So when the searchers were looking for Kenton, they started to do circles around the camp, And when he is found, it said that his body was found lying on top of the snow, surrounded by a chaotic mix of blood and wolf tracks. The ground was disturbed with evidence of him trying to basically defend himself. There was torn pieces of clothing, and his injuries, when wildlife experts did show up, they did explain that his injuries were both severe and very consistent with a wolf attack. So this isn't animals predating on perhaps like he had died of a medical event or something like that. His arms and legs did show signs that he was fighting the wolves essentially off, or trying to as best as that he. And what a sad scene. I can't imagine what he went through. I seriously don't think he probably had a clue what was going on. I know that sounds crazy, but I think his brain would have been in such a fight or flight overdrive survival system, like adrenaline mode. I just hope it was quick and he didn't feel what was happening. And the searchers themselves, they said that they were shaken by the scene. And I can't imagine it. I've never come across anything like this in my life. I've responded to like animal attacks and things like that as part of my old job. They never ones where they were lethal or anything like this. Just some cows getting killed kind of stuff. I couldn't imagine. But all I can say is that immediately this story echoed throughout the entire, anyone that was like hiking at the time, anyone that's involved in wildlife management, anyone that's at exploration camps, because it's like, whoa, we forgot that these creatures we're so close to can kill us. And that might sound crazy, but like most people that are out in nature don't have a fear of wolves. It doesn't cross their mind. You hear this bullshit Disney version of people being afraid of wolves, but most hikers, most people that hunt, most people that experience the outdoors on a regular basis, wolves is not one of the things that they give much thought to, other than they want to see one and they want to hear one. And this is a case of when cuddly turns deadly. All right, let's examine a couple other cases of wolf attacks. And this next one, this is an interesting one. Happened not too far from where I live, and this tragedy, this was a very interesting one because it allowed a little bit more insight into what can cause or what can trigger an actual wolf attack. And this attack occurred at some place called the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve. And this kind of park area is a vast nature preserve. It is considered, the wolves there are actually considered to be in captivity because their high fence surrounds the property, and some of the wolves are actually becoming rehabilitated at their property. So it's a super neat little project that was going on at the time where you could go and interact and see about as wild of wolves that you could see in captivity, hear them howl, see them interact with people. They weren't in a small zoo enclosure. It was part of a huge habitat of forest, and a lot of biologists and a lot of work was done at that place to study their behavior. So it was a great tool to go and observe pack behavior, pack mentality, all these. It was a little wolf theater. And enter Patricia Wyman, an experienced biologist who had spent years studying wildlife, and she had a particular interest in wolves. She had visited the Halliburton Reserve on several occasions before her death, and eventually she was hired to work at the Wolf Center. So this reserve is known for its extensive tract of kind of forested land, and not just wolves on the property, there's other wildlife as well. And on April 18th, 1996, just 3 days into her new job, Patricia enters the enclosed wolf habitat. Although she had been familiar with the animals and had interacted with them before, she entered the enclosure without any backup plan or safety measures in place. Now this meaning that people didn't know she was in there. She wasn't a particularly large person to begin with, so that's an important thing to note because often, it is just a fact, size matters. And we're not talking about the bedroom. The bigger you are, the bigger you can make yourself look, the less likely a wild animal is going to look at you as food because you might hurt them, plain and simple. The pack wolves in this case included several mature adult males, and wolves can weigh over 100 pounds. So as Patricia entered the enclosure, like I said, the wolves included two more dangerous. And the pack itself began to circle Patricia. it to specially shift into predator mode. And the attack was swift and lethal. It was important to know that these things, like I said, never lost their wild instincts. Because again, there's something about wolves we seem to forget they are predators. And tell you, like I said, I've been there in nature just chilling to eat my lunch, and this cute little gray wolf comes up and it wants to be your friend. It wants to hang out, and it does. It tugs on the heartstrings. These things do seem like pets. I get it. This anthropomorphism thing. But let me tell you, wolves, they're good at it. And maybe that's part of their strategy is they want to look cute. They want to bait you into that enclosure. They want to pretend to be your friend. But let me tell you, they turn wild and they turn deadly quicker than you can think. And again, like this poor girl is killed. And ultimately, I can't imagine what she went through because I don't want to die by an animal attack. It's literally the most gruesome but natural way to go. And it's not her fault. It's literally her employer's fault for not like flagging this. She'd been there 3 days. Come on. It was a perfect storm essentially for her to be attacked, and all these flags that should have been picked up on by her employer in terms of entering that thing in the first place. Wolves are dangerous. I think most women know that. And you've heard this whole new trend on the internet about like women want to pick the bear. What that means is there's been a lot of jokes online about how women would rather be lost in nature with a bear than, let's say, a random stranger or man, because they think that the man is more dangerous than the bear. And, well, they could be right, because there's dudes that are jerks and men can be creepy. And at least with the bear, you know what you're going to expect. I'll do a little bit of a comparison. I'm going to offer up too, like, for men out there, would you choose the wolf or would you choose the woman? We'll get into that in a second. But first, for the women that do choose the bear, I'll give you a couple little safety tips that might help you survive a human-bear encounter. Okay, first off, if you're out there and you're going to be in the wild, in and around nature, make a lot of noise. Don't want to surprise bears. You don't want them to not know that you're coming. Just give them the chance to avoid you. Walk around clapping your hands, carrying bells, whatever. Number 2, if you're in the woods with the bear, in or around bears, keep your food put away. They want your food, end of story. Keep it put away. Don't give them a reason to get hungry. If you do see a bear, try not to run. It can initiate a predatory instinct for them to chase you. Okay? And importantly, if you're able to take a minute to learn bear ID, if you're going to tell if you're facing a black bear versus a grizzly bear, there's a few important things to consider. In almost most cases, grizzly bear attacks are actually going to be defensive, meaning they want you the fuck away from them. So if you're attacked by a grizz, that's the whole play dead thing kind of kicks in literally, because it's more than likely that they're seeing you as a get the fuck out of my territory or get the fuck away from my babies, and they just want to make you incapacitated. Black bears. So black bears are known actually to be way more predatory than grizzly bears, believe it or not. And so there's 2 types of black bear attacks you have to look out for. First being the defensive attack. Now, a black bear will give you a lot of hints before it attacks you. It's going to be popping its jaws like this, making this like huffing noise. All these things telling you long before it fucking swats you. Now, when you start hearing that stuff, it's the bear's just telling you to leave. Get out of there. Go away from the bear. Don't go closer. The next type of attack is a predatory attack. This is when a black bear is going to be stalking you. So if you see a black bear locked in on you, just walking towards you in a beeline, not making a noise, it thinks you're food and you're in a little bit more trouble than you realize. So what do? Okay. There's 3 scenarios. 1, you saw the defensive signs, you get attacked. You saw the mom with the cubs, you get attacked, you play dead. 2, you see the predatory behavior. Okay? You see this thing locked in on you? Find a stick, find a rock, find something, make yourself big. And if this thing gets close, you hit it as hard as you fucking can. I actually heard a story of a guy doing this. A biologist that with the place he used to work had a bear lock in on him around a truck, and things literally falling around in circles, and he recognized this. He was a bear biologist. So he lets this thing follow him around the truck like 3 or 4 circles. Till he finally gets a shovel out of the back of the truck and hits the thing across the head as hard as he can. And the thing literally snaps out of it and goes, okay, not prey, and fucks off. The same thing is probably going to happen if you can make yourself look big or hit the thing really hard with something around you. And if it attacks, you fight until you're dead. Like, you can't stop fighting, because if it's predatory, it's going to kill you. And it's the other kind, like I said, defensive. You've seen the signs, you're playing dead, because it'll just keep back and coming and attacking you every time you try to get up. And then the third one is that you don't know what attacked you and it happened really quickly. And if that's the case, this is again the situation where you're going to fight, because it's more likely than not you experienced a predatory attack if it just surprised the fuck out of you. Yeah, like eyes, clawing, whatever. You got to bite, grab his balls. I don't care. That's the short and sweet of it. Bear spray is your friend, but it's seriously the chances that it's actually going to work on a bear. Maybe. You're more likely going to pepper spray yourself. Honestly, if you can pack heat or gun where you live, that's your best defense to bring. And prevention is the best medicine. So make lots of noise when you're walking around the woods. All right, now to the guys out there. The female, okay, you're lost in the woods. Would you choose a woman or a wolf? I'm going to say the wolf. Why the wolf? Now, this doesn't count. I would take my wife, but we're talking about a random woman. I really like dogs. And think about this. You got to go hunting. You got to gather firewood. You got to do all this stuff to survive. And if you fuck off for a couple of days away from your campsite to come back and you show up and you've been missing and you're hungry and that wolf's hungry and that wolf's starving and that wolf's wondering where the fuck you are and what you've been up to, he's going to be happy to see you. I'm choosing the wolf. And right now, I know there's some dude out there saying, what the fuck? You can't have sex with the wolf. You fucking idiot. You're the guy. You're the reason why the woman chooses the bear. The only advice, though, I do have in that is for surviving a wolf attack, from what I've gathered, I've watched a few documentaries on this, but there's not enough data out there to give you any real reliable advice. But the one thing I've seen when they attack moose and they attack other animals is that they usually use like this baiting behavior where, you know, one wolf's nipping at you, you react so that the other one can come in and attack you. And it seems like you'll see moose that survive these attacks. They literally just stand still and fucking stare them down and it'll last sometimes an hour or 2 hours of the wolves just sitting there because the moose will not give them the opportunity to attack by reacting. So I don't know, just thought, hopefully you never end up in that situation. But if you do, you're probably going to die. I'm not going to lie. Okay. The last case we're going to take an examination of is the Candace Berner case, which happened in Alaska in 2010. So this gives us kind of three really different habitats where wolves do behave differently in, and there was a fatal attack. So this happened near an area called Chignik Lake, and it happened during March of 2010. Candace was a 32-year-old special education teacher from Pennsylvania and had moved to Alaska essentially to take in the wilderness and nature and live that Alaska lifestyle up there. There's a lot of open spaces around Chignik Lake, and Candace loved to jog and explore the area. And on March 8, 2010, she would go out for what was supposed to be a routine jog along a secluded trail that kind of circled the village, completely unaware of what would happen next. Now, this area was known for having very dense forests, making it hard to see into it, but also having unpredictable weather. Being in Alaska, it was home to a ton of different wildlife, bears, caribou, moose, but definitely wolves. And when Candace failed to return home, the local residents would send out a search party. So what was able to together is that the wolves, again, in a very similar fashion to what Kenton Carnegie went through, would have circled Candace, and it appeared like they were trying to do the same thing, like testing her movements, testing her a little bit, seeing if there's an opportunity to see where her weaknesses were and if she could actually be prey. But it was said that her attack again was brutal and fast, ending her life very quickly. And when she didn't return home, people in the village grew more and more worried, and a search and rescue party is sent out. What they would find was a completely grisly scene of the ground and snow stained with blood and pieces of flesh and wolf tracks everywhere. Again, the scene bore the marks of a predatory attack, and wildlife experts were able to determine that, again, it wasn't a case of her dying and being attacked. It was which you see in a lot of cases, by the way, of wildlife attacks where people are dead already. So people are dead already. They die, maybe a heart attack, stroke, whatever, hit their head, and then they're predated upon. And of course, people think it's a wildlife attack at first, but the person was already dead. But in this case, unfortunately, she was still alive and would suffer a horrible, brutal attack by these animals. And as the biologists in the area looked into it, again, these wolves were hungry. They were territorial. This was part of their hunting track. And something lit that switch in their brain to go from those normally sociable, easygoing creatures into seeing Candace the same as they would see a moose, a bear, any other animal as just food. And her death was another reminder again that when you venture out into nature, you're always thinking about all the different dangers, getting lost, cold, starvation, hypothermia, and bears. We have bears shoved down our throats at the time we're little kids. The bear's going to get you. But seriously, it's worth taking into consideration when you're going out that you might be going into areas with wolves, and take a minute to read up a little bit on some safety and some things that you can do. Again, making noise is a big one. Bring your pet. Dogs can be a good thing, sometimes bad, but making a lot of noise, making yourself look bigger than you are if you do see them, don't feed them. I'm telling you, if you run into a pup when you're out hiking or someplace like that, they will come up to you. You can fucking feed the things. They are going to behave like your dog, but the problem is that pup is just part of a larger pack who's got some pretty nasty adults in it. And yeah, I don't want to be on the other end of that. In particular, too, like wolves have a few more biological adaptations that allow them to hunt bigger animals better in winter. So it's another factor to consider too, is like you need to be paying attention to this much more in the kind of snowy times than you do in the summertime. So food for thought that you become way more vulnerable in the winter to wolf attacks than you do in the summer. And yeah, lastly, just one other cool little tidbit about wolves is that wolves actually do predate pairs, and packs of wolves will kill grizzly bears, black bears, which is neat. We often think of bears as the apex predator in the landscape, but no, yeah, they fall victim to packs of wolves fairly regularly. Thank you for joining us today on this kind of gruesome journey into more human-wildlife interactions. I have some more cool animal attack stuff probably coming up in another episode. Find the stuff fascinating and interesting. This is an interesting thing today because a little bit different than the other episodes. Like, you can check out my episode on orca attacks. The link's in the video here. But this is this isn't a case of like hubris, of people being stupid and going out and fucking with wildlife or doing stupid stuff like climbing into an orca tank and getting killed. Like, these are people just going out for a walk. And I don't know how much. That's just sad. They definitely didn't deserve this, but we forget it. We are part of the food chain. And there's not a lot really to say to that other than it could have been anyone. And I'll see you again next week. And don't forget, August 23rd, this Friday, I'll be doing an hour of live short stories, interactive with you guys. Probably going to be touching on some paranormal mysteries, animal attacks, and a few funny stories. Definitely looking for your feedback and looking to talking to whoever wants to join. So we'll see you then. Thanks and take care, guys.